I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor, the podcast. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this fine day?
Even though I was all by myself today, I felt like throat punching.
Who did you feel like throat punching?
Myself.
Oh, you weren't getting in line?
I wasn't stepping in line and taking care of business.
Were you annoying you?
Me was annoying me.
I've had those days before too.
You ever have that day where you just feel like you just don't have it? Even though the job is getting done, you just feel like, man, I probably could have done that a little better.
Could have done it better, could have done it quicker. Just could have felt accomplished when you don't.
It was one of them days.
Just one of those days.
Just one of those days.
Where would you like to start with your verbal throat punch on this Thursday?
Let's start with the son of Joe Biden.
Are you a hunter of Hunter Biden? Are you a hunter of Hunter Biden stories?
I've been hunting for Hunter Biden stories.
And what has the hunter found?
Well, the hunter has found that at some point in time in the future, I hope we have a research team that can do the work for us, because it would make it so much easier.
Yes, I would love to have a whole team of individuals working on this podcast, grow it so everybody could have the opportunity to learn, discuss, and just grow.
That would be researchers researching research. So it's interesting that we continue to stare down the barrel, so to speak, at Hunter and all his misgivings. 5 years and counting. We have no indictment. We have no arrest. We have nothing but, what's that word people use? Hyperbole and falsehoods from people.
We have a lot of falsehoods from people.
Yeah, making things up about, we're not going to go down the laptop road because we all know that it's a real thing. But now we have him potentially going to court or meeting with a judge, not for his high crimes and misdemeanors with the laptop and all of the LLCs and all of the funny money. You would think that people that are educated and have class, when they sleep around and they make a baby, they would recognize said baby and pay the mother what she's entitled to raise that child.
And I'll raise the bar on that. And raise your own child and be an active participant in your child's life, especially when you have other children that you are an active participant. So we know that you can do it.
And I'm fully aware that people in America, and I only know Americans because I live in America, love dogs, animals, dogs and cats, birds, fish.
Yes, we are big animal people.
And I heard a Fox News contributor, and I've heard a same contributor for CNN make the comment or statement that during Christmas time, the Bidens, his dad and mom, had stockings up on a mantle.
It's happened more than 1 year in the White House.
Yes, and they didn't have this child's name, which is their grandkid, on the mantle, but they did have a stocking for their dog.
Oh, I did not hear that they had a stocking for their dog.
Yes.
I did hear that they had repeatedly left this child out of the Christmas stocking photo op.
And as early as 2 days ago, the president made a statement about his grandchildren at a presser and counted the number on his hand and left out his kid.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that this judge has a real pair, whether it's male or female, and that's in phrase only, not literally, and takes this man and this family to task over this child and gives the mother her just due. Because obviously the paternity test has proven that it is his kid.
Yes, he denied that he was the child's parent, the child's biological parent. Paternity test was taken, and in fact, he is the child's biological parent. And he started paying child support, but then claimed hardship and wanted the amount of support reduced because he is too poor to pay what he should be paying, is his claim, despite living in high-end locations, traveling all over the world, still doing business dealings all over the world. He wants a judge to believe that he is broke and cannot pay. And also, he doesn't want this child to have his last name.
Well, if he's selling these paintings for a couple $100,000 like he supposedly was, then he could probably just take the revenue from one or two of the paintings and give it to the child and the mom and say, here you go. Here's some from in the rears. Here's to help you out now. And I'm hoping that here in the near future, things for me turn around, which we know things are turned around. If he doesn't have any money, that's because he's spending it inappropriately, which was on the laptop.
Yes, the manner in which he was spending the money is on the laptop. Just so our listeners are aware, Hunter has been paying $20,000 per month, which is a calculation based on his income. And he is saying that he doesn't make the kind of money he used to make anymore, therefore it should be lowered. However, he won't. In all appearances, he's not telling the truth about how much money he makes, because what his tax returns claim and the money going in and out of email exchanges on his laptop have proven to be two different numbers. And he also doesn't want to disclose how much money he's getting from his paintings, because then he would owe money to her, or, more or less. He's asking for less. So if he's not disclosing income, it probably means that he would owe more.
So then the young man has no gravitas. He is a fake individual and does not have the class to own up to his wrongdoings.
Agreed. I just would like to note that according to the House Oversight Committee Chair, James Comer, Republican, Kentucky, had a conversation with a news agency and indicated that he, James Comer, is interested in the paternity case as a vehicle to ascertain who anonymously purchased Hunter's artwork for up to $500,000 each. So apparently a lot of who is buying what Hunter is selling. I don't really like that they're trying to backdoor into finding it out. I think that one can have business dealings that are private, but when you are someone who is suspected of working with international people who would go against U.S. interest, and you're going for foreign interest, I agree that knowing who is buying his artwork is very important, considering he had no training as an artist. But again, he had no training being on the Burisma board and all of these other things, so I guess training's not necessarily an issue.
Isn't it interesting that these high-powered lawyers that he's hired, instead of seeking the truth, are trying to intimidate witnesses and whistleblowers?
It's a sad state of affairs.
Or if you're from the DC side of the fence, it's business as usual.
I guess that's true. Business as usual. Intimidate and hope that they walk away.
Also, I want to add a little bit in there with the president in mind. Isn't it interesting that a man that faked his way through school, did get a degree, I'll give him that, but worked his way into politics, lied his way through things, plagiarized. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on, yet has garnered enough power to become the president of what everybody calls the free world, the most powerful position in the world. And his son is able to utilize him for their own personal gain. Multiple family members can do it for their personal gain. Or was it really for their gain, or did he somehow end up getting most of the money back from them and he was just using it to launder?
Probably using it to launder. That's the
Because I would
nice way of
assume
putting
that
it.
if investigators would look into all of these family members, if they're living lavish lives, lives of luxury, big homes, big cars, a lot of money in the bank that doesn't match their income level, then I'd say he's laundering and paying them a percentage to push hundreds of thousands, if not millions, through. But how did a guy from Delaware, Joe Biden, get so powerful when people know what kind of person he really is?
Is that one of the, it's not what you know, it's who you know? So he had the right connections. He was hooked up early into the right connections. And then they all agreed to help each other out when necessary. So it doesn't matter if you're a truth teller. It doesn't matter if you're a good or honorable person. What matters is that you're hooked up with the right person.
Yes, and this is why when I go through training classes, and I've gone through them over the years that talk about harassment and quid pro quo and that sort of thing, and not as it relates to sexual harassment, but the type of things that they're getting monies for. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. Is the quid pro quo laws were written for people of lower income levels like ourselves, because it appears that we have quid pro quo laws, yet they're insulated from them, and they continue to be found to have done them, and nothing's ever done. I heard a news contributor this morning, as a matter of fact, make the statement that we're starting to get kind of tired of listening to Hunter, and all the things he's supposedly done. If we have the evidence, which would be just like the lawyer we talked about last week during the election, which she had supposedly, but was never able to produce the machines that were mistabulating votes and that sort of thing. She couldn't come up with an answer. Well, if our Republican side has the evidence, it needs to be presented. We need to charge. We need to prosecute.
Okay, I want to jump back for 1 second, and then I have a topic on the machines and tabulations. So something that I've kind of wondered this for a little while because of how much we say that Joe Biden doesn't have mental capacity for certain things, like working longer hours than 11 to 4. But just recently, Joe Biden, trying to appeal to union workers, says, "My grandfather died in the same hospital I was born in 2 weeks before I was born." That's kind of sad. I mean, you're saying, here's my union grandfather, and I didn't get to meet him because he died 2 weeks before I was born. Joe Biden's grandfather died September 26, 1941, at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. Joe Biden was born November 20th, 1942, at St. Mary's Hospital in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now, is he attempting to be a liar? It seems like he habitually lies. Whoever he's in front of, he tries to make up some sort of story that connects to that individual. And instead of coming from a legitimate place, which he could say a story of, "I've always loved union workers and I've always been for union workers." Why do you have to make up a story on some other relative that I never met, died right before I was born in the same hospital, and he was a union guy?
He embellishes in front of every group or sect that he goes before. Yes. And it's called being a habitual or pathological liar. And this man, who is, quote, the most powerful man on earth right now, has always had the ability to tell the truth, but for whatever reason cannot. There's clinical terms for it. I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a doctor, so I'm not going to look in Webster's or Merriman's and give you those definitions. People can figure those out on their own.
DVSM-5.
Yes, he is a non-truth teller.
Okay, so another thing that we talked about as of this past week, and talking about ballot boxes. So we have an individual who was attempting to support President Trump in his re-election bid by saying that she had all of this evidence that Dominion was deleting, flipping, changing, sending information out to foreign countries, etc., but never came through with actual proof of any of what she was saying. She would just continually say it, and then people were following her, and then she would always say she would release it soon, and it never came out. But one thing I do want to know is a Michigan Democrat has been sentenced to house arrest for sabotaging a ballot box in the 2020 election. A local official in Flint, Michigan, has received 6 months of house arrest for the misconduct while in office after sabotaging a ballot box in her own election. So she was running in 2020. But these aren't independent, one-off election documents. This affected from federal, state, local. It affected all groups to include federal elections. And this is a Democrat. So she was the Flint Township clerk, and she was accused of breaking a seal on a ballot box to ensure that the votes could not be recounted. Now, if you have an individual who is working for the government, who is affected by votes because they are someone who is voted into office, and you had them break a seal on a ballot box so it could not be recounted and it turned into a box ineligible for recount, you run into a situation where how many other local people are fudging certain things, breaking certain seals. This is just one person who's guilty and has been found guilty. There is other evidence of other people, Democrat and Republican leaning, that have done similar things. Either have fudged numbers, have invalidated election ballots. So what happens when we can see it? We see that people have been arrested, we see convictions, and we're still told that there is no widespread voter fraud. And if you listen to the language after 2020, November of 2020, it was, there is no voter fraud. And then it changed, there is no widespread voter fraud. And putting aside what one woman attempted to do for Trump, if you look at all of these local jurisdictions and all of their issues with people getting arrested or cited, looked into ballot stuffing out of, I believe it was Michigan. It's on video, people turning in more ballots than they're eligible to turn in. We don't get to have a definition of widespread voter fraud, so that way they can just say there was none.
Is it climate change or is it
science denial?
Yes. The gist of it is there is election fraud. There's voting fraud. There's machine mistakes. There's malfunctions. Here's what happened in 2020. There was a very well put together, coordinated effort to do what was called not ballot stuffing.
Ballot harvesting.
Part of it was ballot harvesting, but mailing out the ballots in mass numbers so you could just vote and there was no ID verification. If you look at some of the states that Trump had won 5, 6, 8% in the previous election cycle, during this one, like Georgia, I believe he lost by 12,000 votes.
That sounds about right.
It was probably the first time in our history a lot of people had watched live on television whole counties that were stopping counting. They weren't counting the ballots because what they were doing, in my opinion, was looking at how many they needed to push themselves past the total number to win. Therefore, they looked at a county, okay, we need 12,000 extra ballots to win here, so miraculously, everything shuts down. They continue to count again, win by 12,000 votes, win by 14,000 votes. You had that, and you mixed that in with Soros and Facebook and all these guys, Zuckerberg, we've talked about it multiple times. Then the election is fraught with fraud.
On various aspects of it, it's not just one thing that was an issue. It was a bunch of things that became the issue, whether they stopped counting and then said we only have this many ballots left, and then would come back and say, oh, we found another, insert how many thousands of ballots we have to count. How do you not know how many were turned in? That should be a very important point to know how many have been turned in your jurisdiction, and some can't just magically show up, or you just continually error and give the wrong amount that you have left. And that happened in more than one jurisdiction. So even if that's a human problem, then we have a human problem. We have a problem of people not knowing how many ballots, so I could sneak a few in because you didn't know how many you were expecting. But that...
Right. Well, and I'm not saying that Trump didn't lose and Biden didn't win, because it could have been, if there was, say, 150 million people eligible to vote, could have been 74 million to pick your number. It could have been that close without cheating.
You didn't need to cheat. It could have been that close, but we had an integrity problem.
Yes. There could have been an integrity issue. I mean, COVID was a perfect... we were primed to have this ballot issue with mailing out these ballots. That was so wrong.
And even in places like Pennsylvania, where it was later ruled that the mail-out system, the way it ended up working, was unlawful by Pennsylvania law, they still upheld having had it done. So even though you say this went against the law, but we're still going to accept it.
Well, Texas has battled with lawsuits and with filings of fraudulent voting. And they were actually able, there was multiple lawsuits by liberal counties, I think 12 to 14 of them. And the attorney general had to get his attorneys to fight every one of these cases. And if they lost a single one of them, then this ballot issue was going to remain basically in perpetuity forever, which is what they're going to try to do now in California and Wisconsin and Georgia and all these other states, is continue to mail out ballots and let whoever wants to fill them out and send them back in.
And I believe I told this story on this podcast before, but just for those who haven't heard it, at the house that I was living at for the 2020 election, the primary, we received at my household 5 mail-out ballots. My husband and I had registered as wanting to have our ballots in person, but California has started a thing where they mail out everybody's ballot automatically. Even if you say you want to vote in person, you will get a mail-out ballot. So why 5 if there's only 2 adults in my household? California made a mistake. They sent me 2 ballots. They sent my husband 2 ballots, and they sent the former owner of the house, who had not lived there for more than 5 years, a ballot. When I did a return to sender on the old owner's ballot, I was sent another notice that said that the former owner did not sign the document. Therefore, they needed him to sign that he didn't live there. And I looked him up, and it appeared that he had already passed away. So I've noted on there that he was deceased and sent it back. I received another document that said that he needed to sign in order to be removed from the ballot rolls.
Apparently, whoever's reading your notes or your return to senders don't know how to read.
Yeah, so the voter rolls remained so with a deceased person on there, or at least a person who had not updated their address. And when the owner of the house is trying to say, hey, this guy doesn't live here, please don't send ballots here, they're still going to send them. And that is the state of California.
Welcome to California, comrade.
And by the way, in 2020, more than 154.6 million turned out or sent in their ballot for the presidential election. That's for 2020. And in 2016, 137.5 million people voted. The difference, 137.5 million to 154.6 million, is the largest increase between consecutive presidential elections since the inception of CPS voting.
Which makes it highly suspect, wouldn't you say?
I would say so.
Yes. Especially considering we had a young man win the presidency prior to that, who was our first black president in the history of America. And there was a big push on to not have old white people running. Yet one of the 2 old white people garnered more votes.
Somehow the oldest, whitest man out there received the most votes in history. And the Democrat Party, mind you, is traditionally thought to be the party of the working man. Is that correct?
At one point in time.
At one point in time. I think they still kind of bill themselves as the party of the working man, and they're for the little guy. And it's the evil Republicans who always want to take more of your money to give to the rich billionaires out there. Well, it seems like there are more billionaires, the heads of tech, finance, and different media groups who have been throwing their support behind Joe Biden. So we have a bunch of billionaires who are saying, vote Democrat. I thought they weren't the party of billionaires. Now, why would billionaires be saying to vote Democrat if they didn't believe that they were still going to get something in turn?
Well, absolutely, because that part of the Democratic Party tends to give them some good tax relief, some good benefits.
Yeah, they're some of the biggest supporters. Where do you think they get their money? Do you think all of the Democrats running in these cities as DAs that are backed by George Soros, another billionaire, who are backed by George Soros, that is billionaire money that you're like, yes, billionaires and progressives go together.
Quid pro
quo.
Yep. I don't mean quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. So I see we had another person win an event that isn't biologically that person. So we've had a person win, I believe it was part of the Boston Marathon. 14,000 women ran and a transgender male won.
You mean one first place or
yes, one first place?
That was not, I do not believe that was the Boston Marathon.
It was a marathon recently.
Well, I was actually looking into the Boston Marathon, which is why I do not believe that it was the Boston Marathon. I think it was one over in the UK. Because I did hear about a person who previously ran as a male and currently they are transitioning. So then they ran under the female category. And there was a lot of back and forth, and they said they may give up their trophy, but it's unclear.
So that was the Boston to UK marathon.
Yeah, they ran across the water. They said, hey, Jesus, and ran across the water.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, so reasons why I was looking at the Boston Marathon is I wanted to know what amount of a difference it could make if a male is allowed to self-identify as female and run in the female or women's category of a major event such as the Boston Marathon. So out of all of the male and females that ran that were local to Massachusetts, only 3 females finished in the same time period that all of the Massachusetts males finished in. So only 3 women would have been a part of all of the men of Massachusetts. So the top 100 finishers in the Boston Marathon for 2023, which is not just Massachusetts, but this is the whole Boston Marathon. The male division, it ran 2 hours, 5 minutes, 54 seconds to 2 hours, 26 minutes, and 41 seconds. The female division, 2 hours, 21 minutes, and 38 seconds to 2 hours, 53 minutes, and 25 seconds. 17 of the female runners of the top 100 runners could have ended up in the top 100 of men, but they would have landed in 36th place or later. And that is 17. If any one of the top 1,000 male finishers were to compete against the females, they would place in the top 100. Any one of 1,000. In fact, the finisher number 1,000 of the men had a time of 2 hours, 44 minutes, and 43 seconds, which would put them in 51st place. In reverse, the female finishers who placed 52nd to 100 wouldn't even be in the top 1,000 of men. And then looking at the 100 meter, so this is 100 meters worldwide best records of time that we have kept. It's since 1899 that they've been keeping run time. If you look at the 100 meter on men versus women, the top female world record holder is at 10 seconds and 49 milliseconds. She would be ranked almost 7,000, 6,969th in the world, and this is all time from 1899 to present. There are 395 men who have been clocked doing that same time, and they are mediocre for men. Not to say that they're not fast. I mean, they're faster than me, but it's middle for men. And so they would be first place for women. 395 mediocre men in the world of all time. There are 6,500 plus other men that could hands down hold the women's world record.
So what does your last 5 minutes of research tell you?
There are biological differences between men and women. And just saying you feel like a woman or you are a woman does not change that biological difference.
You would be 100% correct. It's interesting how we're kind of maneuvering and changing things around, though. We've even had a university block transgender sports research over in the UK after the proposal mentioned the term male. An ethics board is finding it as misgendering.
Yes, you can't say how do you feel about men who would run in a women's sport because it's misgendering and not nice.
Well, it's interesting how we're trying to wipe out the term male and female.
We're trying to wipe out women.
Yes. So what is one of your favorite sci-fi type shows?
Star Trek?
How long Star Trek been around?
I believe it first came out in the 60s.
Okay. Have there been any transgender portrayals in Star Trek?
I'm sure there have been, or at least androgynous and other alien species.
But they're still males, right? And they're still females.
Yes, mostly male, female, bipedal species, humanoid life forms.
Okay, so then just like we gave women, not we personally, not me, gave women's rights and the right to their own sport and the right to make good money in sports just like males do, why do we now find it in our interest to eliminate that term, male or female, when we can in fact all coexist, right? Okay, so there's males, there's females, and there's transgender, lesbian, gay, LGBTQ,
IA plus.
IA plus.
The whole alphabet.
Yeah, so why can't there be all the above if that's what they're driving at? So it looks to me, see, because I'm starting to wake up to it now. Remember, I told you I don't understand. I don't know what I don't know.
Yes, sir.
They're trying to make one half of this equation extinct.
Yes.
And if you listen to mainstream biologists, not biologists that are on the fringes of society, like some of these experts said there was fringe doctors when it came to COVID. Okay, so let's put the two equal then. If you guys say that some of these scientists aren't smart enough to figure out COVID and its origins and that it was man-made, blah, 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 well, then we need to push the fringe scientists or biologists out that say there's more than two genders. There's male and there's female. Period. When a male can have a baby, then I'll change my mind. When a female can provide, I don't want to say...
impregnate someone.
Thank you very much. I'm in. Okay. When scientifically that changes, and I'm not talking about little lizards or other small animals that can swap sexes. There's some in the ocean that can. I'm talking about when a human can change from point A to point B and back, I'm in. Women have worked 50 years plus to get where they're at.
I mean, a woman's right to vote wasn't solidified until 1920. So we are 103 years from just voting. We are about 50 years from the time that we started to be allowed to have our own bank account without a man's permission.
And I have nothing against people personally at all. It's not my place to judge.
But it's the admission that there are differences.
Yes.
So I would like to segue into some failures, if you don't mind.
Just don't look my way when you say failure.
Haha. So one of the failures that we had during COVID times was the fact that Chicago ordered the firing of employees who would not comply with the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, a judge in Chicago has ruled that the city must rehire and compensate those employees who were terminated for not complying. It ran counter to the law, so it was a failure of our leadership in Chicago to follow the law.
You would be correct. And I hope they get their money back with interest.
They are supposed to receive a 7% annual interest on the lost wages. So if it is followed, that is something that will come their way. So another failure, same area, which is COVID. Miss Weingarten is attempting to rewrite her role as the union head and the closures of schools.
Well, they always do, and they forget that they're on tape. We have their audio and video. We know what she said.
Yeah, so she was just recently on CNN doing a panel talk, and her claim is that she was diligently working with the teachers union to reopen schools as quickly as possible, even though she was on record saying the exact opposite. She tried to downplay her role in closing schools and how long she kept them closed for.
These narcissists just cannot tell the truth, can they?
No, they can't. So she was called out during this CNN Tonight by the former Deputy Director of Political Affairs for President George W. Bush, who was also appearing with Weingarten. And this is another failing. This is a failing of the leadership of the union, of our school system, of our government, along with Dr. F. Word, Dr. Fauci, who now takes and still takes no blame for any one of his policies that led to these negative outcomes, takes no blame for attempting to rewrite where we can look for a potential release, which is, was it a COVID or was it an outbreak of a bat at a wet market, or did it come from a lab leak? He's rewriting his role in stopping people from looking into the lab leak theory, and even his role in the statements that he made of what America should do in order to fight COVID, which was not to mask. And it was, oh, well, I only said that so we could get masks out to the people who need it. We should have always been masking. And then it was, oh, well, you shouldn't go out in public places, and I'm not going out in public places. Never mind the fact that I threw out the first pitch at a baseball game when it was unnecessary, and he made the rounds everywhere. He tries to rewrite the history of his role in the downfall of America.
And he denied that he made the recommendation that if we have to, we do draconian lockdowns. When we have him on video saying we may need to lock down. More failures, please.
Well, another failure that we have, this constant failure, is our debt ceiling limit crisis. It is a constant crisis that has been going on year after year, in which one side claims the other side is holding basically the entirety of the United States hostage to a vote of certain little things they
we'll
wish
all
to
die
have.
without the drama. We must have the drama in D.C.
Yes, the Democrats are saying they will only accept a clean bill, which they never accept a clean bill on anything else, but they will only accept a clean bill, and the GOP debt ceiling that they wish to pass, the bill that they want to pass, has certain requirements of reducing the federal deficits and reducing spending. So they want to lower discretionary spending, lower mandatory spending, and essentially put us on track, at least that's the claim, to reduce our deficit. That they don't want a continual debt ceiling hike.
I'll bet your math is easier than mine when it comes to debt ceiling. So
Okay.
I learned something since I've been exercising the last 3 years.
Okay.
I was pretty big, and now I'm not small, but much smaller.
Fit.
So you eat 2,000 calories a day and you're sustaining your weight. If you want to lose weight, what do?
You reduce by 500 calories per pound that you want to lose.
You reduce your calorie intake. What happens? Magically, if you eat a little healthier and you eat less, you lose weight. So let's flip that to DC and money. So let's say, we'll do a simple number. We know it's in the trillions, but the government brings in $1 million a year. How do you save money?
You don't spend more than you bring in.
Correct. You spend $1 million or less.
And instead we send millions and billions to foreign countries over and over again saying how necessary, required it is, even though we're already in a hefty amount of debt. And then we tie it to people's feelings. I love everybody, but sometimes we need to have the facts. Sometimes those facts need to be what we go forward with, and our feelings need to be put aside.
Yes, and I know we don't curse on this podcast, but this makes me want to curse. But we have ruins of nations all over the world. We dig and unearth them on a regular basis. You know why? Because they did the exact same stupid that we're doing now as Americans in D.C. that think they have the better widget and the better idea. They continually bicker back and forth while people like you and myself and others in the middle to upper middle class get hammered every election cycle. And that same exact thing is going on right as we're talking right now. You have people that go to the grocery store. They can't make a decision as to what they're going to buy because tomorrow morning they're going to have to put gas in their car so they can do what? Wash, rinse, repeat. So at some point in time, somebody's got to get these knuckleheads under control because this debt ceiling limit, like you said, it's probably been going on 100 years. Every election cycle, every couple of years when there's a budget. Oh my God, we got a problem here. We're not spending enough here. We're spending too much there. We're sending $1 billion to this country. We send $500 million to this country. I would like to know, because I've never looked it up, how much money we've sent to the Sudan over the years. Or have we just done like other African countries that we've just gone in and taken all of their prime real estate and all their essential minerals and such and brought them back and made lithium batteries and things like that out of them? You know, because now Sudan has gone into a civil war, and what are we doing about it? Probably zero, other than evacuating or exfilling the people that need to be removed.
Which I believe we waited more than a week on after people were already asking for help. So since you brought up the math or the numbers, one of the things I did look into is the math. So the GOP debt ceiling would save $4.8 trillion over a decade. They always forecast these things into decades, but that would be $480 billion a year. And then we're told to pull at our heartstrings, but that would cost 780,000 jobs in the first year. So, is saving $480 billion worth 780,000 jobs? That would be a worth of $615,384 per job. That's what it would equate to. I understand that the math doesn't just include jobs. It has a lot of other things. But the cold, hard pinpoint, is it worth slowing the economy and potentially losing 780,000 jobs due to the slowed economy for 615,000 jobs or a $480 billion savings for people who are massively in debt?
We need to do what's right. And like you just looked at the numbers, as long as the numbers add up, we need to go that route. And then the job loss, as long as they're green energy jobs that we're supplementing anyway, who cares?
Which we're already supplementing
Yes.
because they cannot stand on their own.
Because it's non-sustainable. Hey, I know. How about we not have China build all of our solar panels or a bulk of them? So what did we do? We took money and sent it to them to then in turn build panels, green energy, and bring them back to America and sell them back to us. So they're double dipping.
Aren't we so lucky? And that's what our government is doing because they had to authorize that. They had to authorize the import and export. They have to authorize all of that. If something is potentially technology driven and it could hurt U.S. secrets, they will stop the import or export of certain goods. But we seem to be willingly exporting and then re-importing into the United States from China. And by the way, as of the end of March, so this is a month old by now, there has been over $115 billion sent to the Ukraine in the last year, 13 months of the war. We've sent approximately 2% of our U.S. budget, even though we're going into debt, so that should tell you one thing. There's a savings of $115 billion right there. Stop sending money to foreign countries.
And experts are saying that this war will not end for at least 2 more years. You would think they would be trying to negotiate a peace, but it looks like we're just going to let this thing run its course, kill max people, max casualties, exchange land back and forth, fight to a stalemate, and then countries like America will have to go back in and spend more billions
to rebuild
them.
Which is what we wash, rinse, repeat seem to do.
Yes.
But this is with anybody's budget, your own personal budget. How many times did going deeply into debt year over year benefit you? I have not been benefited personally. I found that when I went into more debt, when I spent more than I brought home in a year, I was not better off. And it took buckling down and paying off my debt, not eating out, not driving to fun activities as much, saving every penny I could to put on my debt in order to get to a place where I was better off. I am not better off by massive debts, and neither is our government.
And it's not healthy because you always feel a sense of anxiety and never being able to catch up or get ahead.
Yes, so the physical toll.
Yes, there is a physical toll that comes along with being in debt. And that's not taught anywhere.
No, it is not.
And you don't find out until too late in the game, or for some people, too late in the game, and when you really don't have any recourse or course of action to fix things. Because little government programs like bankruptcy and things like that, that's not the fix.
No, it's not. And the government even said that you cannot bankrupt student loans, which is where we're telling young people to get into massive amounts of debt that you can't get rid of. So we encourage, as a society, for people to get in massive amounts of debt, more than their annual wages are going to be after they graduate even. We encourage this, but the government is the one encouraging it, and the government already has a problem doing the very same thing, only they get to print more and take more of somebody else's money. So do you get to print more and take more of anyone else's money? Does it make you better off?
No, the taxpayers are just a big cash cow for the federal government. They will get their money back one way or another, just like they did with extra COVID money that was sent to you. You had to claim that at the end of the year as income. These groups, these tax experts, they do not do anything without taking your money. I'm sorry. They're not doing this for free.
No, and speaking of what COVID did, so the American Rescue Plan of 2021, which we talked about on this podcast previously, but just to reiterate, the American Rescue Plan of 2021, thanks to Congress, because it was passed by Congress and Biden, it was signed into law by Biden, lowered the reporting threshold from $20,000 and over 200 transactions to just $600 from any number of transactions, which was effective January 1st. Why does that matter? Nearly 40% of Americans have sold items online, and they started in the pandemic. You were getting rid of stuff that you didn't need anymore, didn't want anymore. Maybe you had some extra and you're like, I don't need to keep this around. That average net was about $1,800. Why does that matter if you're not selling new items? Well, if you are getting money in, even selling your used items, even selling at a loss of what you paid for, the government still wants to know, and it is still reportable. And they are reporting on Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. By the way, PayPal owns Venmo for all of you out there who aren't sure who owns what. So basically, PayPal is reporting on two different actions. But you have selling your car, selling your refrigerator, selling your furniture, selling your stereo, selling your clothes is a reportable amount of money, even for personal items. If you took a loss, so like I said, even if you sold it for less, you still receive a 1099-K for the loss-making transactions. It's still reportable. But then you have to figure out how to make offsetting entries on your 1040 yourself in order to not get dinged. If you can't figure it out, if it's too complex, because our system is pretty gosh darn complex to where you can't take that loss, you have to have other ways you made money, you're going to get hit with taxes. Thank you, Biden. Thank you, Congress.
However, though, the word on the street is if you start multiple LLCs and you move your money around and you use your neighbors and family members, and your dad happens to be the most powerful man in the world.
Oh, you're talking about the presidential.
Then you can get away with these tax items. Or like a lot of companies and pharmaceuticals and such, they make mistakes, but they make billions. They get caught. They get penalized. But the penalty is usually about 1/100th of the monies they've already made. So you got to follow that sometime. Look at a pharmaceutical that made a pill that made people ill, but they sold $85 billion worth of them, and then they get a fine by a judge or the federal government of $20 million.
Pennies on the dollar.
Yes. It's very interesting.
So let's talk about the second largest bank failure. A third bank, First Republic Bank, which is considered now to be the second biggest bank failure in the U.S. I think our U.S. financial sector is having a few problems. Even though we're being told that everything's fine, the FDIC has seized First Republic Bank and plans to hand over control of its assets to JP Morgan, which is also a really big company who I believe was bailed out back in the last financial crisis. So why is it that this bank, First Republic Bank, can fail and their assets stripped and given to another bigger bank?
Depends on who you know.
So now we've had Silicon Valley Bank, New York Signature Bank, and First Republic Bank. And these were FDIC insured deposits. Some were insured and some were not. And the federal government will make good on those that were FDIC insured. But one thing that came to my mind specifically because of the FDIC insurance. So when my husband and I were shopping for a bank because we were going to sell our house and we didn't know how long it would take us to find another house, we wanted to understand what we could do with the money, because if we put it in one account, it would be above the FDIC insurance level. And so we sat down with the banker to say, what do we need to do? Because this amount of money is going to go over that, as a just in case. And the banker told us not to worry about the FDIC insurance, because if you need it, then there are more problems than just wondering about your money. So he kind of poo-pooed us on thinking about the FDIC insuring our deposits.
That's why you put your money under your mattress.
I'm going to have to say that would have been a better thing, because apparently we've got it wrong 3 times. 3 banks have failed. 3 pretty sizable ones.
Well, it's just like the savings and loans in the 80s. We had a bunch of those fail.
And yet a banker would tell us not to worry our pretty little heads over just a few little dollars.
Remember, one of the words or phrases you've heard in the not so distant past is too big to fail.
Yes, the banking crisis of '08, the home crisis, the everything crisis of '08, too big to fail. So we had to pump billions, prop up, and save, because we could not possibly have any of those banks fail. Although I think Washington Mutual was the only one allowed to fail.
You know what's interesting? It's a handful of, let me slide back to Washington, D.C. Handful of folks lost their positions in Congress and the Senate, just a handful. Okay. For the most part, it's the same people, same leadership. And we're continuing to have the same problems.
Oh, you mean in the last 15-ish years? Or the last 20-ish years?
20 plus.
Yes.
So it's the Pelosi's, the Schumers. Who's that dude from Utah? Oh, the former leader when the Republicans were in charge. Oh, my goodness. He's been around like 105 years. I should know his name. Mitch McConnell.
He's Kentucky.
I know he's Kentucky.
But who was the other one out of Utah?
Orrin Hatch.
Thank you.
Yeah, I get them two mixed up because even though they look different, they act and respond to things very similar.
Very similarly.
Yeah, so those are big-time rhinos. And when you think you can't count on them, they're there. But when you really need them, they're not.
So a topic that we brought up that I would like to touch on is the George Soros-backed prosecutors. A lot of them tend to be not just Democrat, but ultra liberal. And they have been allowing people to serve no jail time, have been actively looking to get people off for killing children and serve no jail time, among many other things that a lot of these George Soros-backed prosecutors have done. So a Missouri judge has moved to hold one of those prosecutors in indirect criminal contempt after she and her subordinates continually failed to show for multiple court dates in front of these judges. And why does that matter? Because if your prosecutors aren't there, what is going to happen to a case? They get dropped. And if you've already started the process, depending on how far in you are, that could mean that people can never be prosecuted for the crimes that they did commit. And so now the judge has said that it appears that this particular prosecutor has a complete indifference and a conscious disregard for the judicial process. And in fact, that there is sufficient evidence of disdain and disrespect for the judicial process. It would actually appear that this is their way of letting people off who have committed crimes. And I think of all of the people that committed other crimes that they got prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, even if it was a minor crime or the apparent minor crime, that we have people committing major crimes. And it's in the hands of a prosecutor who has a political agenda and gets to say, I'm just not going to show up and do my job today, as the way to get around the law and holding people accountable.
So if they raise their right hand like congressmen, senators, and presidents do, then they're not upholding
the laws of the United States.
The laws of the United States and the laws of their jurisdiction. Amazing. Let me step back a couple steps real quick. We were talking about being in debt and the physical toll it takes on you, the mental toll, the financial toll. So over in Australia, they're having issues with their economy as well, and they're thinking about raising interest rates by 0.25 up to 3.85.
Oh, aren't we in the sixes?
Yes, but it's creating a lot of stress for homeowners. Homeowners and potential home buyers are on knife's edge. See, so it's not just here. It happens in our type of society and others that actually have freedoms and have banks and can buy homes and rent homes. It's a worldwide global crisis, not just here.
Okay, so this leads me into the response to my homework assignment from last week.
Ooh!
You assigned me with a task of asking AI or ChatGPT how to fix homelessness. And so I did ask, and what ChatGPT said was the following. The issue of homelessness, and I should note that I specifically asked for California. The issue of homelessness in California is complex and requires a comprehensive approach that addresses multiple factors contributing to a problem. And so then it gave 5 suggestions. One of the first suggestions was affordable housing. And it said the lack of affordable housing is one of the key factors leading to homelessness. This is the claim through ChatGPT. And so what happens if we continue to raise interest rates beyond the ability of people to then get a house that they can afford? And I'm not just talking about the homeless crisis, just in general, so we don't create more homeless individuals. So if, as of now, we have a problem, raising the rates so more people can't afford a house sounds like a counterproductive solution. And it is generally people on the left, and I say this with no negativity, please don't read it as that way, but it's generally people on the left who talk about the way to fix homelessness is through affordable housing, and that we need to redistrict areas to have more affordable housing. We need to make sure that we can have more high density housing and affordable housing in places that were previously zoned for low to medium density. How do you turn around and then say a leader under the Democrat president who also supports affordable housing, that leader is going to make houses less affordable through their interest rate hikes? So that was suggestion number 1 from this AI. 2, mental health services. Many homeless individuals suffer from mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. So an answer is to provide access to mental health services. Substance abuse treatment is number 3. Job training and placement is number 4. And collaboration with nonprofits and community groups is number 5. We have spent, California, billions of dollars doing this exact model. This exact ChatGPT AI model. We've done it. It hasn't worked.
So the AI is not as smart as she thinks she is she?
He thinks he is. This is not a she. No, don't you dare.
Okay. He is not as smart as she thinks he is, because I just came up with how to solve homeless while you were so eloquently speaking.
And how do we solve the homeless crisis in California and beyond?
So I bet you if you look at the local fast food place right down the street from us and look at the, say, 8 to 10 homeless that frequent that McDonald's every day, I guarantee you an investigator or somebody that analyzes the human condition, even though they've probably talked to them, they may know them, they've probably never actually sat down and figured out their family tree, so they can then take a step back from that person, go back, speak with their family members if there are some alive, or if they do have a family tree. So they can say, okay, tell me about the life of this person. Where were they working? Did they have a home life? Did they have children? Were they a school teacher? Who knows? Whatever their current condition was prior to, or what their condition was prior to their current state of affairs. So then you can then dive into and find out what the trigger was. If you can find out what the trigger was for that person, then you can find out the trigger for the next person, then the next, then the next. And you might be able to start building a platform with which to figure out how to help people that currently aren't in that situation to not fall into these traps, whether it be medical help, lower cost of living is where we need to go with it. They need to get interest rates down. They need to get the cost of housing down, because it doesn't matter if you raise interest rates right now, because the cost of houses are so expensive. Even if you were paying a simple interest loan, a house like we live in that legitimately is probably worth, I'll just throw a wild number out there, $100,000. Okay. And the market has driven it up to $400,000. Who can afford that? But what I'm getting at is you got to go back and dive into what caused the problem. What was the trigger? Was it multiple triggers? Was it one? To see if you can then help them work through it, or at least prevent the next block of people from falling into the same trap.
So it sounds like you want to treat the whole person and not just throw good money after bad.
100%.
I think that that's a phenomenal idea, treating the whole person, looking into their whole situation. I know a lot of stories, if you will, sound alike, but each person has a different reaction to their life and their drivers.
So guess what? Yes. And that's how they should have handled, they being Fauci and them. I hate to throw COVID out there, but that's how they should have handled that medically as individuals, not as 300 million sheep. Every person reacts different to medication. Every person's lifestyle, their human condition is different. Therefore, if we would have looked at it more as individuals and not as big blocks, we probably would have had a partial different outcome. A lot of the symptoms that have appeared after the fact may not be symptoms at all.
Well, and it does appear, just diving into that or segueing into that, is the long COVID, or what was attributed to long COVID, appears now to be symptoms of too much mask wearing. And if that is truth, wrongful, too much mask wearing, not changing your mask out enough, not washing it enough, not being healthy with it enough, because a lot of people just put on the same mask 100 different times, but they would wear it morning, noon, and night. They made themselves sick. It now appears that the long COVID symptoms are not long COVID. That is, it is in fact wrongful mask wearing. Is there and are there legitimate ways to wear masks? Absolutely. As we've talked about on this podcast, that there are people whose jobs it is to make sure that you have a good fitting mask for the job or task at hand.
Yes. OSHA rules and regulations as are applicable to mask wearing per situation.
And there you have it.
So for you folks that are still running around wearing those dirty masks,
make sure you get clean ones.
get a clean one if you're bent on wearing the mask. I'm not telling you shouldn't wear a mask. That's not my job. Whatever makes you feel safe and comfortable, by all means do it.
You have a health condition, you're at more of risk. Make sure that you look into how to appropriately keep yourself safe.
i.e., see your doctor. If you don't have a doctor, there are online medical areas and people that you can follow that are legitimate doctors. Don't just go off of what somebody else tells you to do.
And wash your hands, you dirty people. Yes. All of you. Every person out there. Every single one of you listeners.
And for you bad drivers. No, just kidding.
I would like to go back into the topic of affordable housing, keeping things affordable, and making sure that we're not raising the rates of, well, everything that's out there. Sometimes we do it because the costs have gone up. So then the cost of buying the bag of potato chips goes up. The pack of meat that you want goes up. The block of cheese that you want goes up. But let's talk about when your government plays a role in raising your electric rates, which will now take money out of your pocket for those essentials. Legislation, AB Assembly Bill 205, has been put into practice. And most of you out there, myself included until recently, may be unaware that PG&E or your local utility, could be Southern California Edison, San Diego, Gas and Electric, whoever you get your utilities through, may be looking at your personal income information so you can pay more for your electricity. Now, what does that mean? These utility companies must comply with the state law that was passed last year that requires customers to be charged a flat fee to pay for electric system infrastructure, such as power poles and transmission lines. This, by the way, kind of goes back to looking at PG&E making money and then not spending the money for the infrastructure to fix the infrastructure. Keep in mind, they are responsible for the Paradise Fire. So who has to pay for it? It was never going to be them. They have been giving themselves raises. They have been giving themselves bonuses. They have been paying out on their extra money earned. AB 205 made its way in there thanks to the Democrats because Republicans don't control anything in California. that requires infrastructure charges now.
We're the last two Republicans in California, by the way. All other Republicans have vacated. They moved out 6 months ago. They all live in Florida and parts of Texas and parts of Utah.
So the California Public Utilities Commission is reviewing the proposal on what to adopt, how much to adopt. So the full implementation is expected by 2025. And so in its explanation letter, PG&E said the plan will not generate any new revenue for them. It is just to fix the infrastructure. They are going to be restructuring the components of the manner in which they deliver power. That is their claim. That's how they claim that it's coming down. What does that mean for you? If you make less than $28,000 per year, there will be a $15 fixed charge per month. If you make between $28,000 and $69,000, there's going to be a $30 fixed charge per month. Between $69,000 and $180,000, that's a $51 fixed charge per month. If you make more than $180,000, that is $92 per month. So those who are going to be the most affected are those with the highest income. In California, $180,000, I don't even think puts you in the top 5%, not making $180,000 a year. And if you live in Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, and the big places, that will still put you in a very medium to low income, not low income, but medium income category. You are not going to have as much money to stretch your dollar.
So we have done what PG&E here, because this is who our utility provider is. We've done what they've asked us to do. We've gone solar. So our solar bill is pretty much zero. Now, because they couldn't maintain the infrastructure in a Class A state, they want to give us a surcharge. So now, even though I get nothing from them, nothing from the grid, I pay zero now. I'm going to have to pay them a surcharge to go use the lights at the local grocery store. Or so my neighbor 4 doors down, who unfortunately doesn't make what I make, can supplement their electricity. The President of the United States wants to introduce Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's new rule, which is because I have a great credit score, if I purchase a new home, then I have to pay $20 to $40 a month through the life of the loan to help pay for the person that doesn't have the money.
Doesn't have as great of a credit score.
Right, doesn't have as great of a credit score, which means that they didn't follow the rules like I did, my wife did. They want us to go all electric on our vehicles, so they're raising the you-know-what out of fuel costs, taxes. California, we pay more taxes at the pump than I believe any other state.
That sounds about right.
I think it's $1.25 a gallon. So we just get penalized for being super people.
Yeah, if you do too good, they will make sure that they get their money somehow. So for those of you who make middle of the road income, you make a national average, $360 a year. If you make a bit above average, $600 a year. Just to be hooked up to the grid as your infrastructure charge. And then, of course, if you make more than $180,000, you're going to have over $1,100 a year for infrastructure charges. Never mind how many times they paid themselves out. Never mind how much money they've donated to Gavin Newsom and other individuals like Gavin Newsom. The infrastructure that they did not fix, and then they chose to give themselves extra money, padding their paychecks or their bonuses or donating to political causes, you're still going to pay for it. You, the little guy.
When I'm reincarnated, I can't decide what career I would like to go into. Whether I want to be a PG&E executive, a state legislator, federal legislator, or a Biden. Man, I've got a lot of things to think about over the next 40 years.
Well, just make sure whoever you are when you come back, you don't go to Minnesota and say mean things or say untruthful things, you'll land on a government registry.
Oh, so we're going to be like our neighbors to the north with their little thought police.
Yep. If you were to write an article that claimed or argued that COVID-19 was either a bioweapon or leaked from the Wuhan lab, you could end up on a report to the Department of Human Rights as someone that has bias. So they're going to register bias. So if you have a bias or someone says you had a bias, you can go on a government registry.
Okay, well, just be honest. When you write that article, don't say it leaked. Just say it was intentionally released to control the population in certain countries.
Yeah, you don't want to get reincarnated and have bias. That would just be terrible.
No. Having an opinion, just like the person that is writing this bill saying that it's bad to do that is bad, right? They're better than you.
Because their thoughts are correct. Whatever they are, whatever they say, they are always correct. Do you think that they would write a bias bill if they believed anything they did would land them in hot water?
That's the same type of individual who has started this whole woke thing. I'm woke, but only when I drink Starbucks.
You're woke up?
I'm woke up.
Yeah. So, and by the way, they want lawyers to sit around discussing whether or not you have bias. So that would be another department, more hiring, more government funds to have lawyers sit around discussing whether or not it was a bias incident and you should be on a government list.
No, what I want the knuckleheads like this to do is take a flight to Washington, D.C. See, where is the U.S. Constitution kept? The actual hard copy? I'm sure they have that under lock and key, and they have a generic version out there.
Well, that's at the National Archives
Right.
Museum. There are plenty of generic copies, but people these days don't read cursive, so we would need it in print.
An interpreter. So they need to send this individual or individuals out there to actually read the Constitution, read the amendments, read the First Amendment.
Go back to the Bill of Rights.
Yes, go to the Bill of Rights.
Get to all 27 amendments. Have interpreters for what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the follow-up amendments mean.
Read read the Federalist Papers. Read all of it. Look at the sum total of the parts and look at the end result back there, not where they're at. Because this is not Russia. This is not China. This is not countries that think of their citizens as animals, as mules, as lower than dirt. There's actually a reason all the things took place back in the day. So I'm hoping that if you're listening to me, go back there and read the Constitution, or maybe the city council building you work in or the state house probably has a copy there.
So a couple follow-up topics. There is a former Harvard professor who has been sentenced to 6 months of house arrest for lying about his ties to China. So something that happened, which was really interesting on the timing, was a Harvard professor was working with certain groups from China and a Chinese university and lied about his ties to a particular recruitment program. And this was a crackdown on Chinese influence in U.S. research. This particular individual, who was the chairman of Harvard's chemistry department, was convicted in December of 2021, but just recently given 6 months of house arrest. He already served 2 days in prison, and he must pay the IRS $33,600 in restitution for what he did to hide some of his money, making false statements, and then filing false tax returns and failing to report a Chinese bank account in which he housed that money. And this was one initiative that saw his arrest right at the time that the lab leak was occurring, or that we were just learning about it. He was becoming known to the public in January of 2020. And then 2 of his students attempted to take specimens out, and I believe one of them lied about their ties to the Chinese military to get their visa to come to the United States. But the Wuhan University paid him up to $50,000 a month plus $158,000 in living expenses, and he was paid in cash and deposits to his Chinese bank account, which he failed to report on his U.S. income taxes. But mind you, this stuff happened in 2013 and 2014, but it wasn't until more recent that they arrested him.
2013-14 is probably when the Wuhan lab really started ramping up their studies. And they know for a fact, based on their emails and such, and the way they shut down and went dark, that the military took over after they realized that Bat Lady had potentially invented something that could jump from human to human. The thing I want to know is now, has the Sudan been a very stable place ever?
As far as I can recall, no.
It's interesting that there's a biolab in the Sudan.
Why would we keep a biolab in the Sudan? Oh, we wouldn't keep it. They kept their own biolab in the Sudan, right?
Yes, that fighters have seized. That contains contagious disease pathogens, the WHO has claimed. But they're the ones that were reliable in the handling of COVID transparency. So I don't know how much I would believe
the WHO.
WHO.
I definitely wouldn't put too much weight into them. Unfortunately, it took Taiwan outing the WHO on helping to hide what was going on in China and what had started to spread around the world.
So when you have to hide something and then it turns out to be true when it's claimed to be a falsehood, then that's what tends to start all of this speculation and conjecture, and whether it came from the lab, didn't come from the lab. Did it come from a Walmart? Was it America? Was it Japan? Was it China? Well, guess what? We know what we know.
Turning to our veterans and military members, because you may need to get care at the VA in the future. So there are 2 senators that are pushing to expand a program that allows veterans to see doctors outside of the VA. But the VA has been pushing to rein in allowing veterans to go to doctors outside of the VA because of the cost of the programs. So you have Senator Jerry Moran, who is a Republican on the Veterans Affairs Committee and the ranking member, and Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, who is now an independent. They are introducing a bill that would allow the existing guidelines to remain, in which patients can seek non-VA care. And this is to stop the VA from skirting its own rules. So while the VA is trying to change the rules and not allow vets to seek outside care, what used to be a certain amount of days, or if the length of time, the cost, the certain doctors, if they had them available, they started trying to extend the number of days that you would have to go without care before you can seek outside medical care. This personally affected me. I went to the VA. I asked for specific care. Another doctor actually prescribed this care. I received the referral. They did not have the people in-house to see me. So they said, you can go out to outside care because we cannot see you in the allotted time frame. So I start seeing a doctor. It is working. What they did was helping and working. And part way through my receiving this care, I got a call from the VA in which they wanted to cancel me seeing this outside doctor and force me to come in and see their in-house doctor that they had just hired. But the thing was, I would actually have to stop my medical treatment and then wait for them to have availability, which was beyond the dates that they said that a veteran can seek outside care. So they were hoping that I would just agree, stop seeking this medical treatment outside the VA, and just wait around until they could get me in the VA. I had to push back 4 different times to continue seeing the doctor that was actively helping me recover from that particular condition that I was in. So I am hopeful that our Senate will approve this bill ultimately.
So why is it so easy to send money overseas and give it away? We don't get any value for our buck, yet we continue to do strange things with our veterans and not just open the door up and give them carte blanche, period. As long as it's a legitimate thing, there should be no question. They should be able to go outside and seek outside help at any time.
And just for those who are unaware, this is through the Mission Act. Under guidelines, the VA wrote to follow the Mission Act, veterans were eligible to see outside care of a doctor if they faced drive times that were longer than 30 minutes to a primary care or mental health appointment, or 60 minutes for specialty care. They were eligible for community care if they had to wait 20 days or more to be seen by a primary care, or 28 days or more for specialty care. And that's where I fell in, was the 28 days. And they wanted me to stop my treatment for more than a month to go back to them, even though they did not have an appointment for me within those 28 days for the specialty care that I was receiving. And I was going 2 to 3 times a week for this specialty care. So they wanted me to stop for more than a month when they couldn't see me. I understand wanting to rein in the money and making sure that we spend the money appropriately is 100%. We need to do that. Whether you're a veteran or not, the money needs to be spent appropriately. But they also limit these doctors, these outside military doctors or outside VA doctors, to a specific amount of money for certain types of appointments. So they've already set a specific standard of money, and these doctors have agreed to it. So they have started by reining in some of the money, but perhaps what we should do, and perhaps what the government should do, is check itself first, because the feds are on the hook for writing $128 million in duplicate checks for doctors that are caring for vets. They wrote checks from the VA, and then they wrote checks from Medicare. They double paid the doctors. In 300,000 cases, or nearly 300,000 cases, they double paid the doctor. How about the government check itself first?
Absolutely. Maybe we should start using some of these IRS agents that go after people that make minimal wages, but they get taxed kind of heavily. Let those agents audit these agencies and fix the problem.
Let's fix the government. The answer isn't give the government more money, because they aren't spending it right to begin with.
Correct.
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.